Hello, viewers. Hi, welcome back to the ongoing lecture series on the novel Azadi. My name is Piyush Chaudhary, currently working as an assistant professor at the Department of English, Hansraj. It's good to see you all once again to this next part of the novel titled Azadi by Chaman Nahal. As we know, in all the previous lectures, and I'll definitely provide the link in the description box below. In all those previous lectures, we have discussed step by step, chapter by chapter, the various summaries. Then I have also discussed the various themes of the novel. Then, in just the previous lecture before to this, I have also discussed at length some of the characters of the novel. I discussed the character of majorly uh, Arun as well as Lala Kanshiram. Kanshiram is the protagonist of the novel, as we all know. This lecture will be on the women characters in this novel. So there is a very strong reason why I have clearly separated the male characters from the women characters. Of course, this is because the problems that the women faced during the partition of India were clearly very different, and they were clearly different and from the problems that the men faced in the partition, and therefore there is, I believe, a strong need to look at both these aspects, to look at both these characters differently. In any other novel, for example, I have covered a lot of other novels, I have covered a lot of other topics in our syllabus, but but in this novel I would like to differentiate between the males and the females, the male characters and the female characters. The problems that the men faced, they were visibly different from the problems that women faced, because men had to face physical pain and physical trauma. But rather, the women, on the other hand, had to undergo physical trauma, sexual trauma, mental trauma, and so on and so forth, right? So they had to undergo physical trauma, they had to undergo sexual violence as well as mental violence. Moreover, what makes things even worse for women is that they did not open up to even explaining their processes. Obviously, if you look at several of the partition victims, if you look at the narratives, very few women actually come up to speak about the horrors of partition. So the brunt of the partition, it were the women who bore the brunt of the partition, who bore the real, brunt, the real problems, the problems of partition much more severely than their male counterparts, right? Several historians, several theorists and cultural critics, for example Urvashi Butalia, if I can just digress a bit, they have clearly discussed how women have remained voiceless during the partition. In several of the interviews, in several of the partition victims and survivors interviews which were conducted, women very rarely used to come across, and they used to come forward. So because the highly patriarchal setup, and it was usually the men who used to come forward and narrate the horrors of partition, right? So women mostly remained in the margins, and they did not come up in front of the camera to explain their trauma. This is because of the patriarchal construction, where it is not considered appropriate for women to speak in a man's world. So therefore, most of the women have remained completely silent, about the partition, about their experiences during partition, due to the pressures of the oppressive patriarchal structures of society. And therefore, on this note, I have very clearly demarcated the women characters from the male characters in the novel, right? Because the female characters should be read differently. We have to read, and we have to analyze, and we have to look at their trauma, and we have to interpret their trauma with a certain different lens, right? So obviously historical narratives are composed of facts, documents, or through eyewitnesses accounts, but they are silent on, all of these historical documents are silent on certain things. However, it is literature, on the other hand, which focuses on giving voice to the voiceless and giving to its readers what history cannot. It makes us see things, it makes us hear things that history cannot, because history is objective in nature. This is the main reason why we study partition literature. So Urvashi Butalia, once again, in her book The Other Side of Silence, she talks about the suppressed voices of women in and after the partition. Right? So according to Butalia, women remained voiceless and silent about their experiences during partition due to pressures of the oppressive patriarchal setup. So experiences of women during partition is also, it's very visibly linked to the cultural construction of the female body. So her experience, a woman's experience of the partition, is linked to the cultural construction of the female body. So under this cultural, construction, religion and the state were the main perpetrators of the myth of vulgarity of the female body, and they try to control women through the control of the female body. So it is important to see all of this, to understand all of this, and therefore women characters have to be read and analyzed separately. So on this note, let me come now to the main discussion and main topic of the lecture, that is the women characters in Azadi. So as readers also of Azadi, you will notice that most of the women characters are not given adequate space, and they remain more or less marginal figures in the novel, right? So though there are some women characters who play a significant role, but overall, as overall, when it is about the entire narrative, they remain more or less as marginal figures, right? The women characters are mostly household women, and they work either as housewives or they stay within the within the corners of the home. So also they have very little say in the major decisions of the times, and they do not have a major say in the novel or a major role in making decisions in the novel, which shows us the highly patriarchal and male centric society of the mid 20th century. Almost all the characters in this novel are shown as housewives and as typical Indians who are devoted to their husbands and to their family. For example, the character of Prabharani, they help in managing house, running the house effectively, and they do not really step outside the home, and they don't have a very big say in the matters related to family or related to society, right? They remain mostly inside the four walls of the house, and I think all of the women except Bibi Amarvati, they are shown as marginal beings, be it Prabharani or even Ishar Kaur, or even Chandani or Noor or any other female character, even Sunanda for that matter, right? So they don't have much say. They might have their own individual personalities, which some of them we'll be discussing, but they don't really have a say in the society, and this shows the highly patriarchal setup of the mid 20th century, of the times in which the novel was set in. So for example, Prabharani is the mother of Arun, and then Noor also understands that she cannot convert into Hinduism because she is a girl, and therefore she requests Arun to convert into Islam because she is a girl and she will not be spared by the family or by the society. She repeatedly mentions that she is a young girl and she is helpless and defenseless and cannot do much, right? But not just Noor, almost all the other characters remain more or less marginal beings, right? However, as I mentioned, there is one character, her name is Bibi Amarvati. We'll discuss her character later on, but then even she is completely destroyed at the end, because she has to leave her buildings, she has to leave her huge buildings, and then she has to go to India. So first, let us talk briefly about Prabharani. She is the first major character of this novel. She is the wife of Kanshiram. She is the first major character in the novel. She is the wife of Kanshiram, who caters to all his household needs, and she takes care of treating her husband in a very devotional manner, and she is fully devoted to him, and therefore this is one aspect of her character. She is a strong woman, she is resolute, but then she gets her mental state of being is completely in tatters once she hears about the tragic death of her lovely daughter Madhu and Madhu's husband. So as a woman, her role is that of a nurturer and someone who brings comfort and takes care of the entire family. So she's a typical rural woman. She is also illiterate, she cannot speak, she's illiterate, she cannot read, she cannot write, and therefore it is Kanshiram who helps her in learning how to read and write. And whatever pleasures are there, almost all the pleasures in her life revolve simply around her own husband, uh, Lala Kanshiram. So Chaman has shown Prabharani as the ideal devotional wife living in the rural areas. But there are other characters like Madhu, who is also a strong contrast to the more shy and docile Prabharani. So Madhu is the young girl who is full of vigor. She is vivacious. She's in a state of bliss before her marriage, but then later on, after her marriage, she also visibly changed. She is, Madhu is also an important character because she is shown as someone who is openly expressive about everything in life, and she she lives her life perfectly and she lives her life fully. But then it is only after that she is married that her character completely changes, and she loses her individuality and she becomes a very silent woman, not the kind of a woman that she once was, because the marriage took place in a hurry when her parents realized that Madhu is uh, growing younger now, and she's in her early 20s, so she must be married, right? So her life completely changes after the marriage, and it is against the wishes, against her wishes. And after being married, she becomes very sober, she becomes very silent, so her vivaciousness, her lively feisty character, completely boils down, and she's not able to even give birth to children. So these ideas basically show how traditionally, more so in the rural cultures, the idea of a woman is very closely associated with the idea of giving birth, and her viability and the woman's productivity in giving birth is directly related to her respect in society. So through the character of Madhu we get to know that. So we never get to see her face to face, but we get to see her as a character, through the memory of Arun. And when Arun thinks about her past childhood, he obviously thinks about her dear sister. So she's basically a character who comes across as basically just a memory, right? And later on she is killed by the Muslim rioters. Then the next character is the character of Ishar Kaur. She is the young woman and a beautiful wife of Sardar Niranjan Singh. She is pregnant in the course of the novel, but she delivers the child in the train while crossing over to India. uh, she delivers a girl child. She belongs to a Sikh family, and she is very nervous of the fact that the Muslims will attack her and they can harm her, and they can sexually violate her, they can even kill her unborn child, and so on and so forth. So she is described as a woman who works within the house. Again, most of the characters are shown as that only. She is a typical Indian housewife, who is devoted towards her family. And when she realizes that her husband Niranjan Singh is not willing to cut his hair, she is extremely distressed, and she keeps crying the whole day because she is worried about the safety of her family. It is believed that Sardar Niranjan Singh, because he is a Sikh, and a Sikh can be easily identifiable, when they are moving in crowds and the Muslims can attack them. So she wants her husband to cut his hair, and then later on, both he and she and her husband can perform penance in Amritsar after crossing over. But Sardar Niranjan Singh does not agree to that, and he rather self immolates. So she is also a marginal character and has no real significant role to play in the novel. Next is Sunanda. She is also described as an extremely beautiful, she is the most beautiful girl, young woman. She is a mother of two children and also the wife of Suraj Prakash. But at the same time, her high spirits are visible. you know Despite Captain Rahmatullah Khan knowing that Sunanda is married, he has lustful eyes towards her, and he keeps visiting the refugee camp. And then, when Sunanda is a smart girl, she gets to know this. She even asks Arun to ask Rahmatullah Khan to stay away from her, or else she will kill him. Now, after the assault, after the attempted rape and the sexual assault on Sunanda, she does not break. She's not a very weak woman in that sense. But after having survived this ordeal, she realizes that her own honor has been defiled, but this does not break her spirits. This is an important thing. Sunanda is a strong character in that sense. She realizes deep down that if people will get to know about the attempt, then she will be castigated, she will be ignored, she will be looked upon as a defiled woman, and therefore it will be difficult for her to survive in the society, and therefore she requests and compels Arun not to tell it to anyone, right? So despite her own sexuality being defiled, she still remains resolute, and she looks forward in the life to tend to her two children, and because she has to provide a life to her two children, so she does not crumble against this evil incident, and because of her high spirits that she had, right? So she was a highly spirited woman in that sense, right? She takes up sewing clothes for the children for alteration, so she can feed her family and to sustain herself and her family. So this shows the resoluteness and the strength of her character, which was not broken despite the problems of partition, despite the fact that she was one of the richest, she was a member of the richest family in Sialkot, Bibi Amarvati's family, and now she has to sew petty clothes, and she takes alterations to somehow sustain her family. Then we have the character of Bibi Amarvati. She is the rich land lady in Sialkot. So she is also a minor character who does not play a very important role, but she represents the extremely rich people who migrated during partition, and just like Kanshiram, the huge reversal of fortunes befell on Bibi Amarvati as well. And so her strong position as the rich land lady of Sialkot gets completely upturned, and several people used to be her tenants in Sialkot, but now when she is leaving her properties, some random Muslim women will come and live there. She is afraid of that, but then later on we get to know that her own husband, whose name was Gangumal, he accepts Islam, he converts himself into Islam, and he becomes Ghulam Muhammad, so that he, at least he can be in charge of the two huge properties of Sialkot, right? So she, but Bibi Amravati also has a certain amount of self-respect and dignity and pride around her, which is often visible, in her, almost bullying and manhandling and mistreating her own husband, Gangumal, but also because Gangumal is a good-for-nothing character. He's just a, random idler man. He's an idler who just wastes his time, and he's good for nothing. He contributes nothing, and he's just living on, the whatever his wife is giving to him, right? So he's not a very, Gangumal himself is not a very strong character, but he converts himself so that he can save the two huge buildings of Sialkot by converting himself into a Muslim. He gets those, he remains, those two buildings remain in his name only. But then overall, Bibi Amarvati was a matriarch. She was a bossy figure, and in the pre-partition era, she used to control her husband, she used to control her own finances, and was mostly in charge of all the decisions which are traditionally taken by men. So that is also, the character of Bibi Amarvati is also important, and because her strong character. But then she is helpless, and then she has to cross over, and this completely upturned all the fortunes, and then she has to go away to her, leaving her property and money in Sialkot to cross over to India, Hindustan. So in the entire novel, so there was just one character, woman character, who had some social standing in the society, some economic strength in her character, but then even that was taken away, due to the tragic partition. So what is perhaps more important to understand and to discuss rather is the violence, the humiliation, the shame inflicted on women. So basically women are seen as repositories of honor. So what the Muslims did was they deliberately humiliated and sexually assaulted members of the Hindu community, because it is considered that in the women, women are the repository, women are the symbol of honor of a particular religion. And even the Hindus and the Sikhs here in Hindustan were doing the exact same to innocent Muslim women, right? Because it is usually the women who are considered to be the vanguard of honor of a particular community, right? So sexual assault was inflicted on them, which was a way of taking revenge on the members of the opposite clan. So therefore it will not be wrong to say that for women the pain of partition was highest, because they not only lost their homes and properties, but they also lost their own self-respect, their dignity, and also their own sexuality was completely defined, right? So and this happened on both sides of the border, right? I would also suggest the readers to read the story Lajwanti by Rajendra Singh Bedi, the famous Urdu Hindustani short story writer, and it'll allow you more perspectives on the problems and the traumas that women faced. So basically the problems and the traumas that women faced were different from the ones that men faced, right? So men had to face physical trauma and the violence and physical violence and the trauma of their own sense of belonging, but women, apart from all these things, had to also undergo the sexual trauma and the taboo, the sexual violence and the sexual trauma, as well as the mental violence. So therefore on this note, I will come to the end of this long lecture on the novel Azadi. Pretty much all the various aspects of this novel have been taken up. In the very first few lectures, I had discussed the character analysis, the summary, step-by-step summary of the novel Azadi. Then I had also discussed, if you remember, the various themes that are there in this novel. Now, in these last two lectures, I had also discussed the major character analysis and how, so the readers, I believe, the students, the viewers will be able to solve the answers based on all these discussions and on their classroom discussions, which they obviously are doing very well in their own respective colleges, right? So thank you so much. This will be the last lecture of the series, on Azadi by Chaman Nahal. This is the last lecture as part of the VAC. Next up, we have the third topic of our syllabus, that is E.M. Forster's aspects of the novel, which is part of a literary criticism where Forster describes, what are the different aspects of a novel. So the next lecture will be on E.M. Forster's aspects of the novel, and that is how we'll conclude the entire VAC, reading Indian fiction in English. I would sincerely like to take this opportunity to thank all my viewers who have been through the journey, through this long and arduous journey of the novel, and who have been with me since the beginning of the lecture series till the end. I really wish all the best to all of you for your incoming exams. Do well and keep commenting and keep adding more perspectives. Keep watching these lectures, and you are absolutely free to comment your suggestions, your any improvements, or any topics that you would want me to discuss in the course, in the subsequent lectures. So thank you so much for being with me in this long lecture. I will see you very soon with the remaining parts of our course, that is E.M. Foster's Aspects of the Novel. Please stay tuned for those parts. My name is Piyush Chaudhary. It was great to see you here. Thank you so much, and I will see you very soon. Jai Hind. Thank you.